The air in the funeral home chapel was thick with the scent of lilies and unspoken judgment. My name is Felicity, and I'm 20 years old. I stood at the very back, a quiet sentinel, watching the performance unfold at the front. My father was gone, but it felt like I was attending a stranger's farewell. My mother, Charlotte Hill Stanley, 45, was draped in designer black, her face a mask of carefully constructed grief. She wept into the shoulder of my stepfather, Jarrett Stanley, 47, who patted her back with a solemn, almost performative air. Beside them, my stepbrother, Knox Stanley, 21, sniffled dramatically, his eyes scanning the room, as if checking who was watching his sorrow. He was the picture of the grieving son, despite being my father's stepson from a marriage that ended years before my mother, Charlotte, even entered his life. My father had been a good man, but he hadn't been Knox's biological father, or even his stepfather for very long in the grand scheme of things. Yet Knox was positioned front and center, a place I, his only biological child, was denied. I'd tried to approach Charlotte earlier, just for a moment of shared quiet, but she'd given me a tight, dismissive smile. "Honey, we're all so fragile right now. Just be supportive." Supportive, meaning invisible. Meaning, don't disrupt the curated image of the united grieving family. The service itself was a blur of platitudes and generic memories. No one spoke of Dad's love for old jazz records, or how he'd taught me to change a tire when I was 12, or the quiet way he'd always made sure I had a good book. Only Gran Adeline, my maternal grandmother, understood those quiet parts of him and of me. She was 76 and had always seen more than most. After the chapel, the celebration of life moved to a small rented hall. The atmosphere shifted from solemnity to a forced, almost festive air. People milled about, plates of lukewarm finger foods in hand, their voices a low hum punctuated by bursts of laughter that felt entirely out of place. I found a corner near a wilting fern, observing. My cousin, Blair Riley, 23, caught my eye from across the room, a snarky smirk playing on her lips. She was Charlotte's niece and always seemed to align herself with whatever my mother deemed socially advantageous. She didn't wave, just gave a subtle, almost imperceptible eye roll in my direction before turning back to her conversation. Then, the main event. Jarrett cleared his throat, tapping a fork against a champagne flute. The room quieted, attention shifting to him, Charlotte, and Knox, who stood together like a triumphant trio. "My dear wife Charlotte and I, along with Knox, want to thank you all for coming," Jarrett began, his voice booming slightly in the small hall. "It's been a difficult time, but we're a family, and we'll get through it together." Charlotte dabbed her eyes with a tissue, a fresh wave of tears appearing on cue. Knox, ever the opportunist, stepped forward. My stepdad was a great man," he choked out, pausing for dramatic effect. "He always looked out for me. He always said I was like a son to him." A ripple of murmurs went through the room. I clenched my jaw. He was like a son? He was a son, just not Dad's. Jarrett continued, beaming at Knox. And in that spirit, we wanted to honor his memory by continuing to support those he loved. "Knox, come here, son." Knox, with a smug grin that he quickly tried to hide behind a veil of sorrow, walked over. Jarrett produced a set of car keys, dangling them. "Your father, bless his soul, always wanted you to have the best. So we've finalized the paperwork for your brand new Tesla, delivered this morning, a Model 3, just like you wanted." Gasps and whispers filled the room. A Tesla. For Knox. My father had driven a 10-year-old sedan. "And that's not all," Charlotte added, her voice regaining some strength. "He also made arrangements for Knox's full college tuition and living expenses. A $50,000 fund, to be precise, set aside for his studies at the university downtown, Plus, we've secured a lease for a fantastic apartment right near campus, so he can focus on his education. More murmurs, louder this time. Admiration, envy, and a general sense of awe at the generosity. Knox accepted the keys and a thick envelope, nodding solemnly, but his eyes gleamed with undisguised triumph. He glanced my way, a fleeting, superior smirk. When the applause died down and people started moving to congratulate Knox, Charlotte finally approached me. She didn't embrace me, didn't even meet my eyes properly. Instead, she pressed a small white envelope into my hand. "Honey, I know this is hard," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper as if sharing a secret. "We're all hurting, but you're strong. Here, this is for you, something from me to help you through." I looked down at the envelope. It was a generic condolence card, the kind you buy at a grocery store. Inside, folded neatly, was a crisp $20 bill. A $20 bill, for me, his only child. While his stepson received a Tesla, a $50,000 college fund, and an apartment lease. I felt a cold, quiet rage settle deep in my stomach. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the blatant public dismissal, the sheer audacity of it. They thought this was a gesture of kindness. I knew it was a final insult. I tucked the card and the 20 into my pocket without a word. My best friend, Kiara Robinson, who was also 20, caught my eye from across the room. She gave me a small, sympathetic nod, her expression mirroring my own disbelief. She knew, she always did. They think I'm invisible, they think this is over, but Dad's death only cleared the board. Now it's my move. The $20 bill felt like a lead weight in my pocket. I'd walked home from the wake, the chill of the evening air doing little to cool the slow burn in my chest. Our house, the one I'd grown up in with Dad, felt different now. Empty, but also crowded with the ghosts of what-ifs. Charlotte and Jarrett were still out, probably basking in the glow of their public performance. Knox was no doubt already test driving his new Tesla, windows down, music blasting. I kicked off my shoes by the door, the silence of the house pressing in. It wasn't just the $20, it was the culmination of years of being pushed to the periphery. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter, letting my mind drift back. It started subtly, years ago, when Charlotte first met Jarrett. I was around 12, so that would make Charlotte 37 and Jarrett 39. They were a whirlwind, and suddenly our quiet life with Dad was filled with Jarrett's booming laugh and Knox's constant presence. Knox was 13 then, a year older than me, but already radiating an air of self-importance. I remembered one summer afternoon, a few months after Charlotte and Jarrett started getting serious. Dad had just bought a new board game, something we'd been looking forward to playing together. Knox came over, saw the game, and immediately declared it boring before demanding we play something else, something he preferred. Charlotte, instead of gently redirecting him, just smiled. "Oh, Felicity, honey, why don't you let Knox pick this time? He's our guest." Our guest. In my own home. Dad had looked at me, a silent apology in his eyes, but he'd gone along with it. That was the first crack. Over the next few years, the cracks widened into chasms. Charlotte became increasingly preoccupied with Jarrett and Knox. Family vacations became Stanley family vacations, and I was often an afterthought, squeezed into the back seat, or left to entertain myself while they planned activities around Knox's interests. My 16th birthday, Charlotte had forgotten to book the restaurant reservation, only remembering when I brought it up that morning. Knox's 17th, just a few months later, had been a lavish affair at a downtown steakhouse, complete with a surprise DJ. I was 16 then, and I remember feeling like a ghost at my own family's table. It wasn't just the big things, it was the everyday slights. Charlotte would ask Knox about his day at school, his friends, his plans, but when I tried to share something, her eyes would glaze over, or she'd interrupt with a comment about dinner or a chore. Are you sure you want to pursue that, Felicity? Wouldn't something more practical be better? She'd say about my interest in art, while simultaneously praising Knox's vague ambitions of business ventures. But while I was being sidelined at home, another relationship was quietly blossoming, Gran Adeline. She lived alone in her big old house across town. When I was younger, she'd been a bit formidable, sharp-witted and prone to curt remarks. But as Charlotte became more distant, I found myself drawn to Gran. She was 72 when I started driving, and I'd offered to take her to her grocery runs. I was 16 then, eager for any excuse to get out of the house. Then it was Sunday teas, just the two of us, where she'd tell me stories about her own childhood or ask about my day, actually listening. Soon it was doctor's appointments, a regular thing that no one else in the family ever volunteered for. Charlotte would always say, "Oh, Gran, you just call a taxi, dear, we're so busy." But Gran would always call me. I never complained. I just showed up. I listened. I learned to anticipate her needs, to navigate her moods. She'd start by barking orders, but then slowly she'd soften. She'd offer me a second cookie or tell me a secret about a distant relative. She saw the quiet observation in me, the way I noticed things others missed. And she saw the way my own family treated me. I remember one afternoon about 3 years ago after I'd driven her to a specialist appointment. I would have been 17 then, and Gran would have been 73. She was tired, leaning heavily on my arm as we walked back to the car. The waiting room had been packed, and we'd been there for hours. "You know, Felicity," she'd said, her voice raspy, as I helped her into the passenger seat. "Most people chase after what's shiny, what's loud. They don't see the real value in quiet loyalty." She'd paused, looking out the window, then turned her gaze to me, her eyes surprisingly clear and direct. "One day, they'll realize which child had the heart." I'd just nodded, not knowing what to say. I'd wondered what she meant then. Was it just a general observation or something more? I hadn't known then, but now, after Dad's funeral, after the Tesla and the $20, after all the years of being unseen, I had a chilling suspicion. A week later, the official reading of my father's will was scheduled. The air in the lawyer's office was stale, heavy with unspoken expectations. I sat on a stiff leather chair, my back to the window, watching the others settle in. Charlotte and Jarrett took the two seats directly opposite the large mahogany desk, looking like a united front. Knox, of course, was beside them, leaning back, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He looked entirely too comfortable. Blair, my cousin, was there too, perched on a chair near the door, probably for moral support for Charlotte, or perhaps just to witness the drama. Ciara wasn't there. I'd told her I wanted to face this alone. The lawyer, a man named Alvin Stevens, who looked to be in his late 30s, maybe 38, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. He sat behind the desk, a thick file open before him. "Thank you all for coming. My name is Alvin Stevens, and I've been retained to read the last will and testament of the late Mr. Hill." He began with the usual legal preamble, the language dense and formal. My mind drifted, but I caught keywords. Executor, assets, liabilities. I watched Charlotte's face, a flicker of impatience, then forced solemnity. Jarrett nodded along, occasionally interjecting with a "quite so" or "indeed." Knox just looked bored, like he already knew the script. Alvin continued, detailing my father's financial situation. It wasn't good. Mr. Hill, unfortunately, faced significant financial challenges in recent years, Alvin stated, his voice even. There are heavy debts outstanding, several mortgaged properties, and a number of investments that, regrettably, did not perform as anticipated and have since been liquidated to cover existing obligations. Charlotte's perfectly coiffed eyebrow twitched. Jarrett shifted in his seat. Knox, however, remained impassive, almost amused. As a result, Alvin went on, the majority of Mr. Hill's assets have already been consumed in the process of settling these outstanding debts and obligations. What remains is minimal. A low murmur rippled through the room. Charlotte's carefully constructed composure began to crack. Minimal? She whispered, her voice sharp. What does that mean, minimal? Jarrett put a hand on her arm. Charlotte, dear, let Mr. Stevens finish. Alvin consulted his notes. After all creditors have been satisfied, there is a small sum remaining, which, as per the will, is to be divided equally between his surviving next of kin. He paused, then looked directly at me. Felicity Hill, as his daughter, you are designated to receive nothing, as the remaining sum is insufficient to cover even the administrative costs of distribution. The words hung in the air, cold and definitive. Nothing. Knox leaned forward, a triumphant smirk now fully visible. Well, that's not entirely true, is it, Mr. Stevens? He interjected, his voice dripping with false sympathy. My father, bless him, was always so generous. He made sure I was taken care of before all this. The Tesla, the college fund, the apartment lease, those were all arranged privately, months ago, a gift from him directly. My stomach churned. So, while Dad was apparently drowning in debt, he'd still managed to funnel substantial assets to Knox. Assets that, presumably, could have gone to me, his actual daughter. Assets that could have paid down some of those heavy debts. It wasn't just neglect. It was a deliberate, calculated erasure. Charlotte's face, however, was a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Her carefully maintained image of a grieving widow whose stepson was generously provided for was crumbling. She had clearly expected a significant inheritance, or at least something to maintain appearances. This is unacceptable, Charlotte finally managed, her voice tight with suppressed fury. My husband worked hard. There must be something more. Alvin merely shook his head. I assure you, Mrs. Stanley, this is the full and final accounting. Mr. Hill's finances were complicated. The meeting concluded quickly after that, a flurry of frustrated questions from Charlotte and Jarrett, met with calm, unyielding answers from Alvin. Knox, meanwhile, looked entirely too pleased with himself, occasionally glancing at me with a look that said, See, I told you where you stood. As everyone began to gather their things, Charlotte turned to me, her voice suddenly saccharine, but her eyes hard. Felicity, honey, I know this is disappointing. We're all hurting, you know, but family still sticks together. We'll get through this, all of us. She even reached out, as if to pat my arm, but I subtly pulled back. I clamped down the rage that threatened to erupt. Family sticks together? She had just watched me get publicly disinherited, while her stepson flaunted his prearranged riches. This wasn't about sticking together. This was about me being disposable. As I stood to leave, Alvin Stevens called my name softly. Felicity, could I have a word? Charlotte shot me a suspicious glance, but I ignored her. I walked back to the desk. Alvin reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. He held it out to me, his gaze gentle. This is from your grandmother, Adeline Hill, he said, his voice barely above a whisper so only I could hear. She asked me to give this to you, personally. The sealed envelope felt surprisingly heavy in my hand as I walked out of Alvin Stevens' office building. The cool autumn air was a welcome shock after the stuffy, oppressive atmosphere inside. Charlotte and Jarrett were already getting into their car, their voices sharp with frustration. Knox was on his phone, probably already texting about the disaster of my father's finances. None of them spared me a glance. I didn't go straight home. The thought of walking into that house, knowing Charlotte was there, seething over her perceived loss, was unbearable. Instead, I walked to a small park a few blocks away, found an empty bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, and finally allowed myself to breathe. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke the seal on the envelope. Inside, there wasn't a letter, not at first. There was a stack of official-looking documents. My eyes scanned the top page, and my breath hitched. It was a deed, a warranty deed, for Adeline Hill's property, my grandmother's house, and the grantee, the new owner, was listed as Felicity Hill, me. My gaze darted to the date. It was dated 6 months ago, 6 months before my father's will reading, 6 months before Grand Adeline had passed away peacefully in her sleep, just 2 days after that meeting. She had been 76. She had done this while she was still alive, fully aware, fully in control. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Gran had known. She had seen it all coming. Beneath the deed, tucked into a smaller, separate envelope, was a single sheet of stationery. Gran Adeline's familiar, slightly shaky handwriting filled the page. My dearest Felicity, if you are reading this, then the time has come. You are the only one who truly saw me, truly cared. For every tea shared, for every ride to the doctor, for every quiet moment you gave me when no one else would, this house is yours. It was transferred into your name 6 months ago, a private transaction handled by Mr. Stevens, who understands my wishes implicitly. Let them try. Let them try to take what they believe is theirs. They will come, expecting to strip it bare, to claim what they feel entitled to. But this house, my home, is now your home. It is your fortress. Use it wisely. With all my love and gratitude. Adeline. I read the note again, then a third time, the words blurring through a sudden, unexpected film of tears. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion. Gran Adeline. She had seen me. She had truly seen me. She hadn't just given me a house, she had given me vindication. She had given me power. The sting of the $20 bill, the humiliation of the will reading, the years of being overlooked, it all coalesced into a quiet, burning resolve. This wasn't just a gift. It was a carefully orchestrated act of justice. A lifetime of quiet loyalty, of showing up when no one else would, had just come due. I thought about Charlotte's dismissive smiles, Jarrett's enabling silence, Knox's smug entitlement. I thought about how they would descend on Gran's house, expecting it to be fair game, another inheritance to be carved up and claimed. Gran's house was a treasure trove of antiques, of family heirlooms, things they had always coveted but never bothered to visit. They had already started making plans. Charlotte had mentioned it casually to me just yesterday, thinking I wouldn't care. We'll need to go through Gran's things next week, Felicity. Get everything sorted. It's going to be a big job. She'd even mentioned Knox was keen on the antique grandfather clock in the hall. My hands, which had been trembling, now felt steady. My mind, which had been reeling, was now sharp and clear. Gran's words echoed in my head. Let them try. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. I searched for local locksmiths, found one with good reviews, and dialed the number. It was late afternoon, but they usually had emergency services. Hi, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I need to schedule a complete rekey for a property, as soon as possible, tomorrow morning if you have availability. The person on the other end confirmed they could fit me in first thing. I gave them Gran Adeline's address. Tomorrow was the day. The day they planned to descend on Gran's house, expecting to strip it bare. They thought they were coming to claim their spoils. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. My trap. The morning sun was bright, almost mocking, as I stood on the porch of Gran Adeline's house. The locksmith had been efficient, quietly rekeying all the locks, replacing the old brass ones with shiny new hardware. He'd just left, leaving me with a single set of keys that felt surprisingly heavy in my palm. The house, usually so welcoming, now felt like a fortress, silent and waiting. I hadn't told anyone about the deed, not Chiara, not even a hint. This was my moment, and I wanted to savor every second of their surprise. I wore a simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to the funeral, a subtle nod to the gravity of the occasion. Just as the clock on the mantel inside chimed 10, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. Charlotte's car. Jarrett was driving, Charlotte in the passenger seat and Knox predictably in the back, probably still scrolling through his phone. They spilled out laughing, already bickering good-naturedly. "I'm telling you, Charlotte, that grandfather clock is coming to my apartment," Knox declared, slamming his door shut. He was 21, but still sounded like a petulant teenager. Charlotte, 45, adjusted her sunglasses. "Don't be ridiculous, Knox. That's a family heirloom. It belongs in a proper family home, not some bachelor pad." She paused, then her eyes landed on me, standing calmly on the porch. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of mild annoyance. "Felicity? What are you doing here so early? We were just getting started." Jarrett, 47, nodded. "Yes, dear. We thought we'd handle the initial assessment. You can help with the packing later." His tone was patronizing, as if I was a child who needed to be told when to be useful. I said nothing, just watched them approach the front door, Charlotte already pulling a set of old keys from her purse. She tried the first one, then the second, then the third. Each time, the lock remained stubbornly unyielding, her brow furrowed. "That's odd," she muttered, jiggling the key harder. Gran's keys always worked. Knox, now at her side, tried his own set, which he'd probably gotten from Jarrett. He rattled the doorknob. Nothing. "Maybe the lock's jammed," he suggested, giving the door a frustrated shove. I stepped forward, holding up the new set of keys. They glinted in the sunlight. "They won't work," I said, my voice clear and steady, devoid of any emotion. "The locks have been changed." Charlotte froze, her hand still on the doorknob. She turned, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about, Felicity? Why would the locks be changed?" "Because," I replied, taking a step down from the porch, holding the deed aloft, the official-looking papers rustling gently in the breeze. "This house isn't part of Grand Adeline's estate anymore. It's mine." Silence. Absolute stunned silence. Jarrett's jaw dropped. Knox's smug expression evaporated, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. Charlotte's face, usually so carefully composed, drained of all color. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. What is this?" Charlotte finally stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the deed. "Some kind of joke?" Before I could answer, another car pulled up. It was Alvin Stevens, 38, his familiar sedan gliding to a stop behind Charlotte's SUV. He stepped out carrying a briefcase and walked towards us with a calm, professional demeanor. "Good morning, everyone," Alvin said, his voice polite but firm. He looked at Charlotte, then Jarrett, then Knox, his gaze lingering on their shocked faces. "I believe Felicity has just informed you of the situation." Charlotte whirled on him, her voice rising. "Mr. Stevens, what is the meaning of this? You told us my mother's estate was minimal. You said nothing about this house." Alvin adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Stanley, with all due respect, I informed you of the contents of your late husband's will. This property, however, was transferred by your mother, Adeline Hill, to Felicity Hill, 6 months prior to her passing. It was a direct transfer of ownership, a legal and binding transaction. Therefore, it was never part of Mrs. Hill's estate upon her death." He looked at me, then back at them. "Felicity Hill is the sole legal owner of this property. As such, she has every right to change the locks and deny access to anyone she chooses. The air crackled with disbelief and fury. Charlotte's face was a mask of pure shock, then a slow, burning rage. You conniving little, she started, taking a step towards me, her hand raising slightly, but I didn't flinch. I met her gaze, my own eyes steady and unwavering. For years, I had been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one who absorbed every slight. Not anymore. Knox, meanwhile, had gone from bewildered to incandescent with rage. "This is ridiculous. That's Gran's house. It's family property. You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted him, my voice calm, almost a whisper, but it cut through his bluster. I looked from Knox's sputtering face to Charlotte's horrified one, then to Jarrett, who seemed utterly deflated. "You gave me nothing but time," I said, my gaze sweeping over them, letting the words sink in. "I invested it better than you ever could." With that, I turned, inserted the new key into the lock, and pushed the heavy oak door open. I stepped inside, the silence of the house enveloping me like a warm embrace. Without a backward glance, I pulled the door shut, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden, profound quiet. The silence inside Gran Adeline's house was deafening after I closed the door. I leaned against it for a moment, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The adrenaline was still coursing through me, a heady mix of triumph and a strange, quiet satisfaction. I had done it. I had finally, publicly asserted myself. The news spread like wildfire, as I knew it would. Charlotte was not one to keep her grievances private, especially when they involved a perceived injustice against her. My phone, which had been mostly silent since Dad's funeral, began to buzz with texts and calls from distant relatives, all wanting the full story. Most were shocked, some were indignant on Charlotte's behalf, but a surprising number expressed a quiet, almost gleeful admiration. Blair, my cousin, was one of the first. Her text came through an hour after the lockout. "Power move lol," it read, followed by a series of laughing emojis. I didn't reply. I knew Blair well enough to know her LOL was less about genuine support and more about enjoying the drama. The real fallout began a few days later. I spent those days in Gran's house, exploring it properly for the first time as its owner. It felt different now, not just a place I visited, but a place that was truly mine. I found myself walking through the rooms, touching the antique furniture, tracing the patterns on the old wallpaper. It was a tangible connection to Gran, a physical manifestation of her love and foresight. Then came the first direct strike. I'd driven my car, the old sedan Dad had given me, to the grocery store. When I came out, the driver's side window was smashed, a jagged hole staring back at me. A quick glance confirmed it. The side mirror was also gone, ripped clean off. There was no note, no message, but I knew who it was. Knox. It was his style, petty, destructive, and cowardly enough to do it when I wasn't around. I called the police, filed a report, but I knew it was a dead end. No witnesses, no proof, just his signature. Later that evening, Charlotte showed up at Gran's house. She didn't knock. She just pounded on the door, her voice a shrill, angry sound. I watched her through the peephole, her face contorted with fury. I considered not answering, but then decided against it. It was time. I opened the door just enough to see her. She was still wearing the expensive black dress she'd worn to the will reading, as if she hadn't changed since. Her eyes, usually so calculating, were wild. "Felicity, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is an outrage. My mother's house. You stole it." "I didn't steal anything, Mother," I said, my voice calm even. "Gran Adeline legally transferred the deed to me 6 months ago. Mr. Stevens confirmed it. It's all perfectly legal. Legal? Legal? She laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. She was old, frail. You manipulated her. You preyed on her. I spent time with her, I countered, my voice still steady. I drove her to her appointments. I listened to her stories. I was there when no one else was. Where were you, Charlotte? Where were you when she needed help with her groceries? When she needed a ride to the doctor? You were too busy with Jarrett and Knox, too busy planning your perfect life. Her face twisted. How dare you? I'm your mother. I raised you. And this is how you repay me? By stealing from your own family? By humiliating us? Then the tears came. Real tears, hot and fast, streaming down her face. Her voice dropped, becoming a desperate, pleading whisper. Please, Felicity, think about what you're doing. This is tearing our family apart. Your father would be so disappointed. He would never have wanted this. The mention of Dad was a low blow, a desperate attempt to guilt-trip me. But I didn't flinch. I had spent years watching her manipulate situations, watching her turn on the tears when it suited her. I knew this playbook. Dad would have wanted fairness, Charlotte, I said, my voice unwavering. Something you never offered me. He would have wanted me to be seen, to be valued. Something you never did. Her tears abruptly stopped. Her face hardened, the mask of grief replaced by pure, cold venom. You'll regret this, Felicity. You'll be all alone. You think this house is some kind of victory? It's a prison. You've isolated yourself. You've lost your family. I think I gained a home, I said, my gaze firm. And perhaps I finally found out who my family truly is. I started to close the door, but she lunged forward, pressing her hand against it. This isn't over, Felicity. Not by a long shot. I pushed the door shut, the click of the lock a final, satisfying sound. I leaned against it again, exhaling slowly. The confrontation had been draining, but I felt no regret. Only a deep, quiet resolve. Later that night, Chiara called. Are you okay? She asked, her voice soft with concern. I heard about your car, and Charlotte's been calling everyone, telling them you're a monster. I'm fine, I said, looking out the window at the dark, silent street. The car's just metal, and Charlotte, she's just Charlotte. I know, Chiara said, but this is a big move, Faley. It's amazing, don't get me wrong, but karma can be a funny thing. Sometimes, when you get what you want, you realize what it cost you, too. Her words hung in the air, a quiet question. I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Just as I was about to hang up, a sharp thwack against the window startled me. I looked up. A rock about the size of my fist had hit the glass, leaving a spiderweb crack. Outside, illuminated by the street lamp, was Knox. His face was contorted with rage, his arm still raised from the throw. You think this changes anything? He yelled, his voice raw, distorted by anger. You're still nobody. You're still a nobody. I watched him impassively from inside my inherited fortress. The broken window was a testament to his impotent fury. He was wrong. It had changed everything. The shattered window was a stark reminder of Knox's impotent rage, a physical manifestation of the fallout. I called a glass repair company the next morning, paid for it out of my own savings, and watched as they efficiently replaced the pane. The house, my fortress, was secure once more. Chiara's words about karma had lingered, a quiet echo in the grand, silent rooms of Gran's house. Was this victory truly worth the cost? The isolation felt heavy sometimes, especially in the evenings. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my life. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. It was from Alvin Stevens' office. I opened it, expecting more legal paperwork related to the house transfer. Instead, it was a copy of Gran Adeline's revised will, the one she'd drawn up shortly before her death, after transferring the house deed to me. I sat at the antique dining table, the morning light streaming through the bay window, and began to read. Most of it was standard, distributing small personal effects to various distant relatives, a porcelain doll to a cousin in Arizona, a collection of old coins to a nephew in Oregon. Then I found it, near the end, a specific clause that made me pause. Furthermore, it is my express wish that should my granddaughter, Felicity Hill, choose to do so, she may establish a scholarship fund in the amount of 10% of the assessed value of my former residence, located at address of Grand's house, to be dedicated to supporting young women pursuing higher education at the local community college. This fund shall be named the Eleanor Vance Scholarship, in memory of my beloved sister, Eleanor, who was denied the opportunity to attend college due to financial hardship. My eyes widened. 10% of the house's value. Grand's house was valued at $800,000. That meant $80,000. An $80,000 scholarship fund. It wasn't a demand, it was an option, a choice, a karma clause, as Ciara might call it. I sat there for a long time, the will clutched in my hand. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about legacy. Gran, even in her final acts, was teaching me. She hadn't just given me a house, she'd given me a chance to do something meaningful with it. The next day, I drove to the local community college. It was a sprawling campus, bustling with students. I found the financial aid office and explained my purpose. They were surprised, but incredibly helpful. I learned about the existing scholarship programs, the needs of the students. I asked if I could speak to someone, a student who was struggling. They introduced me to Maria, a young woman, maybe 19, with bright, intelligent eyes that looked tired. She was working 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school, living in a tiny apartment with her younger sister. Her parents were undocumented, unable to help financially. She was brilliant, dedicated, but teetering on the edge of dropping out because of rising tuition costs and the need to work more hours. We talked for an hour, sitting in a quiet corner of the student lounge. She spoke about her dreams, her fears, the weight of responsibility on her young shoulders. I saw a reflection of myself in her, the quiet determination, the resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. But I also saw the stark difference. I had been dealt a cruel hand by my family, but I had a safety net, a secret inheritance. Maria had no such net. Listening to her, something shifted inside me. The sweet taste of revenge, the satisfaction of the lockout, began to recede, replaced by a deeper, more profound sense of purpose. Gran Adeline hadn't just given me a weapon against my family. She had given me a tool to build something, to help someone. My revenge had been about shutting the door on toxicity. This was about opening a door to a future. I left the college feeling lighter, clearer. The bitterness that had gnawed at me since Dad's funeral began to dissipate. It wasn't about punishing Charlotte and Knox anymore. It was about honoring Gran and using what she had given me for something truly good. Back at the house, I pulled out my checkbook. I knew the exact value of the house, thanks to the recent appraisal for the deed transfer. $80,000. It was a substantial sum, but it felt right. It felt like Gran. I wrote out the check, carefully filling in the amount, the date, the payee, the Eleanor Vance Scholarship Fund. I signed my name, Felicity Hill, with a flourish. A small smile touched my lips. Let's use some of that money better than they ever would have, I mused aloud, the words hanging in the quiet air of Gran's living room. This wasn't just a donation, it was a declaration, a new beginning. The vibrant greens of summer had long faded into the muted golds of autumn, then the stark silence of winter. Now the first tentative buds of spring were appearing on the old oak outside Gran Adeline's living room window. It had been a while since that chaotic morning on the porch, since the raw fury in Knox's eyes, since Charlotte's desperate tears. I'd spent the intervening months immersed in Gran's house. It was a project, a sanctuary, and a constant reminder of her quiet wisdom. I hadn't done any major renovations, just small, thoughtful restorations. I'd polished the antique furniture until it gleamed, repaired the loose banister on the grand staircase, and replanted Gran's beloved rose garden, which had become overgrown. The house felt less like a museum and more like a living, breathing home. My home. Beyond the walls of the house, I'd found a new rhythm. The Eleanor Vance Scholarship Fund was officially established, and the first recipient, Maria, had started her nursing program, her gratitude a quiet, steady warmth that settled deep in my chest. I'd also started volunteering at a local animal shelter, something Gran had always supported. It was fulfilling, grounding work. The solitude I'd initially felt had transformed into independence, a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. My old life, the one tethered to Charlotte and Knox, felt distant, almost like a dream. I rarely saw them. Charlotte had made a few more attempts at contact after the initial lockout, alternating between outrage and attempts at guilt-tripping, but I held firm. Eventually, the calls stopped. Jarrett predictably remained silent, probably too uncomfortable to engage. The news, however, still found its way to me, mostly through Ciara. She'd call every now and then, her voice a mix of concern and hushed gossip. "You won't believe what I heard," Ciara, 20, said one afternoon, her voice low. We were sitting on Gran's porch swing, the spring air gentle on our faces. I was 20, a few months older than when this all started. Ciara was the same. "What is it?" I asked, taking a sip of the herbal tea I'd brewed. Gran's old teacups felt comforting in my hands. "Knox," she began, then paused for effect. "He dropped out of college. Apparently, he blew through that $50,000 fund in less than 6 months. Parties, designer clothes, some really bad investments he thought were business ventures. And the Tesla? Repossessed. He missed too many payments." I felt a strange mix of emotions. Not triumph, not exactly, more like a quiet, grim confirmation. His entitlement had finally caught up to him. "And Charlotte?" I asked, picturing her face, usually so perfectly composed. Ciara sighed. "She's apparently furious, said he's an embarrassment. Their relationship is completely strained. She's trying to spin it, of course, saying he's taking a break for self-discovery. But everyone knows. The gossip is wild. They lost everything, didn't they? The money, the status, and they still haven't changed." I nodded slowly, looking out at the street. It was quiet, peaceful. The house, once a symbol of my quiet revenge, now felt like a foundation. "You know," Ciara said, breaking the silence, "when you first did it, I was so proud of you. But I also wondered if it was worth it, if all that bitterness would just eat at you." I smiled faintly. I wondered too. For a while, it was just about the revenge, about proving them wrong, about finally being seen. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh earth and budding roses filling my lungs. "And it was sweet, Ciara. Don't get me wrong. That moment on the porch, seeing their faces, it was everything I'd ever wanted." I paused, thinking of the scholarship, of Maria's tired but hopeful eyes. But then Gran's will, that clause, it made me realize something. Karma, in the end, wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about watching them fall. It was a mirror. Ciara looked at me, her expression thoughtful. "A mirror?" "Yeah," I said, looking around the porch, at the sturdy walls of the house, at the blooming roses. They chased after money, after status, after what looked good on the surface. They thought that's what mattered. And they got exactly what they chased. Emptiness, debt, a son who squandered everything because he never learned the value of anything. I leaned back against the swing, a profound sense of peace settling over me. I waited on love, on loyalty, on quiet acts of care that no one else saw. And in the end, I think I got richer.